Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, Ukraine's path to joining the European Union is opening up. The bloc just made a major decision, but not every member state is happy about it. Why other leaders called it a historic moment and who's pushing back. A national defense bill heading to the president's desk with notable wording on China and the extension of a controversial government surveillance law. Melina Weisskop reports from Capitol Hill. Former President Trump saying President Biden is lucky to even get an impeachment inquiry. Iris Tao has more on how the White House is reacting and what's next in the now escalated probe. Polling shows former President Trump beating President Biden in 7 battleground states. Trump explains his take on why. Meanwhile, GOP candidates are hoping to make a splash in the polls before the Iowa caucus. NTD's Arlene Richards reviews the numbers. Rudy Giuliani won't testify in his defamation case. Why not? As his lawyers call the proposed fine the civil equivalent of the death penalty. A suspected terrorist plot foiled. 7 people were arrested across Europe over a suspected terror plot targeting local Jewish civilians on behalf of Hamas. What are their connections to Hamas? Israel Defense Forces reported detaining 70 terrorists who were fighting from a hospital in the Gaza Strip. And a White House official met with officials in Israel for high-stakes discussions about the war. Jason Perry has the update.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Will Ukraine be able to join the European Union? The war-torn nation is now officially on a path to membership.
The EU on Thursday agreed to open membership negotiations with Ukraine. The leaders of EU member states made the decision during a summit in Brussels. Coming out the meeting, the European Council president called this a historic moment.
This is extremely important. We want to support Ukraine. It's a very powerful political signal. It's a very powerful political decision. And today and tonight, I think to the people of Ukraine, we are on their side.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky welcomed the agreement as, quote, a victory for Ukraine, a victory for all of Europe. Thursday's decision doesn't guarantee Ukraine will join the EU, but it's expected to be a boost in morale for the nation during the war with Russia. At the same time, the EU leaders also decided to open membership talks with Ukraine's neighbor, Moldova. They both applied for membership after the war started. The EU currently has 27 member states. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is the only leader opposed to Ukraine joining the bloc.
We set up 7 preconditions, and in the evaluation of the Commission, 3 out of the 7 is not fulfilled. So therefore, there is no reason to discuss anything, because preconditions were not met.
Countries must meet a set of standards before they can join the EU. The standards cover the rule of law, the economy, political freedom, and more. Membership talks could take many years. There needs to be unanimous consent for a new member to join. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
House lawmakers are leaving D.C. for the holidays after passing a massive defense spending bill. It requires the Pentagon to assess the consequences of a hypothetical war with China. Other pieces are receiving harsh criticism, some raising concerns about the government spying on Americans. NTD's Melina Weisskop reports from Capitol Hill.
On a vote of 310 to 118, with 73 Republicans and 45 Democrats opposed, the House has passed its national defense bill. This year's budget, a total of $886 billion, a $28 billion increase from last year, including a 5% increase in pay for service members. And while many lawmakers can stand behind this change, there are other pieces of the bill that some are not so happy about, such as the temporary extension of a surveillance law that some warn is abused.
FISA, we know, has been spying on the American people. They've been spying on you guys with the microphones in your hands right now. That needs to end immediately, so I opposed it.
278,000 improper searches of Americans, and this body is just going to extend the very mechanism of those abuses on the back of the National Defense Authorization Act and say, have a nice day. Merry Christmas.
The bill also allows the Pentagon to use tax dollars to pay for service members traveling for abortions, and some notable wording on China provisions. It requires the Pentagon to assess the consequences of a hypothetical war with China in 2030 and to outline possible avenues for attack.
We need to plan for all contingencies, and China is exhibiting an aggressiveness under Xi that we haven't seen before.
But also an effort to try and go after the U.S. dollar to eliminate it as a global currency by drawing in a lack of confidence to the currency for developing nations.
So all of our Indo-Pacific countries are now working collectively to make sure that we keep China at bay, and we are prepared if China steps over that line.
The NDAA has already passed the Senate, so its next stop is off to the White House for the president's signature before becoming law. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
The White House calling the now formalized impeachment inquiry into President Biden baseless. That's as former President Trump decries that he didn't get an inquiry before getting impeached himself. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
As House Republicans seek to get even more documents and witness testimonies turned over through their vote last night to formally authorize their impeachment inquiry into President Biden, the White House today blasting that move, calling it baseless and lacking evidence. Watch.
But there's no evidence. But there's no evidence. There is no evidence that the president has done wrongdoing. There's none. Absolutely none.
And President Biden also calling it a baseless political stunt in a statement last night. Some Republican lawmakers have indeed admitted that have not seen any direct evidence pointing to President Biden himself benefiting from his son's business dealings. But House Oversight Chair James Comer saying that bank records have shown millions of dollars flowing into the Biden family from overseas, adding that witnesses have testified about interactions between President Biden and his family's foreign clients. Meanwhile, former President Trump today also weighing in, saying that President Biden is lucky to even get an impeachment inquiry. He wrote in the Truth Social post that, quote, "I got impeached twice, was found not guilty twice, but the Democrats never gave me the benefit or luxury of an impeachment inquiry." And the White House today also taking aim at Republicans for going into recess as negotiations are still ongoing over a deal to both approve more funding for Ukraine and to have stricter border policies. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer today announcing that the Senate will cut into their holiday break and come back next Monday to try to cut a last-minute deal with Republicans.
That will give negotiators from the White House, Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans, a time to work through the weekend in an effort to reach a framework agreement.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson says that he's happy to call members back next week to vote if a deal is indeed reached. He also asked that the Senate Democrats and the White House were not being cooperative when it comes to making changes to the U.S. southern border. Back to you.
A new national poll shows Trump leading Biden in 7 swing states. That's up from 5 states last month. NTD's Arlene Richards breaks down the numbers.
Should President Biden be worried 11 months before Election Day? According to recent polls, he should. A Morning Consult and Bloomberg News poll shows Biden trailing in 7 battleground states. That's 2 more than a New York Times Siena College poll showed last month. The latest results published Thursday include a survey of nearly 5,000 swing state voters from November 27 to December 6. Key states surveyed include Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Trump leads in all 7 states by an average margin of 5.3 points. The former president is leading in Wisconsin by 4 points, knocking out Biden's 2-point lead a month ago. Biden performs worse against Trump in North Carolina and Georgia. At a town hall Wednesday in Iowa, Trump took aim at Biden.
Families all across America are struggling under the brutal weight of Bidenomics. You know, Bidenomics means a lot of bad things.
Trump pointed to high prices and inflation as a symptom of Bidenomics. He also questioned Biden's mental fitness.
It's just incredible that he can frankly be even running anything. He can't put 2 sentences together.
As for the GOP primary, a Monmouth County University Washington Post poll shows 63% of likely Republican voters in Michigan would vote for Trump. Haley and DeSantis tied for second place at 13%. Meanwhile, at another Iowa event, Vivek Ramaswamy was on the defense as moderator Abby Phillip challenged his stance on the January 6 Capitol breach.
If you had told me that January 6 was in any way an inside job, the subject of government entrapment, I would have told you that was crazy talk. Fringe conspiracy theory nonsense. I can tell you now, having gone somewhat deep in this, it's not. The reality is we know that there were federal law enforcement agents in that field. We don't know how many.
Phillip interrupted Ramaswamy to say there is no proof that federal agents were in the crowd. In a social media post, Ramaswamy said there is clear evidence that there was at the very least entrapment of peaceful protesters. Over in New Hampshire, Nikki Haley is capitalizing on an endorsement from Governor Chris Sununu, but she needs a lot more votes to catch up to Trump. On Fox News Thursday, Sununu asked for help.
I'm asking everyone to come out. If you're a Republican, a conservative, an independent, conservative Democrat, I don't care.
Sununu, a Republican, believes Haley has enough broad appeal among conservatives and moderates to take on Trump in the GOP primary. But a recent Real Clear Politics poll shows Trump leading Haley by just over 25 points in New Hampshire, 44.3 to 18.7. Trump is set to visit New Hampshire and Nevada later this week. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Former Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani will not testify in his defamation trial. He was expected to take the stand, but his lawyer said today that he won't testify. NTD's Jack Bradley gives us a quick update.
It is unclear why Giuliani won't take the stand. Some legal experts speculate that his testimony wouldn't help his case, as he could be accused of further defaming the plaintiffs. The former New York mayor is on trial for statements he made after the 2020 election about 2 election workers in Georgia. Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss are accusing him of claiming that they were involved in rigging the election. A judge in Washington has already ruled that Giuliani defamed them, and the trial is determining what penalty he should pay. The plaintiffs are seeking as much as $43 million, a penalty that Giuliani's lawyer called the civil equivalent of a death penalty. The trial is expected to last a week, but could spill over into another.
A Senate Democrat is possibly seeking to run for president in 2024. Joe Manchin says voters are ready for a change from extreme positions on the left and the right. Manchin says he would consider running for president as a third-party candidate, but only if he truly had a chance at winning. The only things for sure right now are that he's not seeking re-election for his Senate seat, one that he's held for 13 years, and that he's planning a 2-month speaking tour starting in January. The Democrat from West Virginia says President Biden is on the extreme left. Some fellow Democrats are concerned that a third-party candidacy would shred votes from President Biden. Manchin, a self-described moderate, believes America needs to get away from extremes and says leadership in both parties isn't representing Americans. 7 suspected terrorists were just arrested across 3 different European countries. Many of them allegedly targeted local Jewish citizens on behalf of Hamas. Danish Prime Minister today saying that the situation is, quote, extremely serious.
We can, for a number of years now, see that there are some people who live in Denmark who don't wish us well, who are against our democracy and who are against our freedom, and who are against, in reality, Danish society.
Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands all arrested suspected terrorists. Danish police said that the bust was part of a probe into a street gang that was plotting terror attacks across the country. So far, the investigation is still in a preliminary stage. Meanwhile, the suspects arrested in Germany and the Netherlands reportedly took orders from Hamas leaders in Lebanon. They were allegedly tasked with storing weapons in Berlin for future attacks against Jewish institutions. European authorities have warned of a rise of violent attacks by Islamic terrorists following the Israel-Hamas war. Israel Defense Forces recently reported detaining 70 terrorists from inside a hospital in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with officials in Israel for high-stakes discussions. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest on the war with Hamas and a warning. This report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
Israel Defense Forces say they are using as much precaution as possible to fight Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip. For example, a precision strike against this sniper who was firing at Israeli troops. But what to do when the terrorists are fighting from hospitals? This brigade commander said that over the last 2 days, they've been evacuating the Kamal Adwan hospital.
Terrorists have emerged from here to attack our forces. During the evacuation, many weapons were brought out of the hospital. Many terrorists also came out of the hospital and are currently detained in Israel.
They can be seen here in this video in which 70 terrorists came out of the hospital and laid down their weapons before the IDF troops. These men were transferred to Israeli field interrogators to be questioned. An Israeli officer explained on Wednesday that this is a tactic used by Hamas terrorists to use people as shields.
But while Hamas sees every innocent death as a strategy, we see every innocent death as a tragedy.
And she explained what Israel has been doing to keep civilians safe.
We published a website with maps and instructions to guide Gazans in specific neighborhoods to safer areas. Now, we understand that not everyone in Gaza may have access to the internet at all times, so we're also communicating by dropping flyers with instructions in Arabic. We also have IDF officers communicating in Arabic in the media, online, on the radio, and on the ground. This is in addition to tens of thousands of individual phone calls that we're making to people in Gaza.
But civilians in the Gaza Strip still continue to be caught in the crossfire. And people at this hospital in Khan Yunis voiced their frustration.
They are children. They were playing. They're not firing rockets.
Meanwhile, on Thursday, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with officials in Israel to discuss the war. Here's Israel's Minister of Defense speaking about the difficulties fighting Hamas terrorists.
The Hamas is a terror organization that built itself for a decade to fight Israel. And they build infrastructure under the ground and on the ground. And it is not easy to destroy them. It will take and require a long period of time. It will last more than several months. But we will win and we will destroy them. So thank you once again for coming to Israel, for helping us, and for supporting us.
National Security spokesperson John Kirby said Sullivan talked with Israel about possibly lowering the intensity of the military operations in Gaza. But he did not give a time frame for when that could happen because he said they don't want to let Hamas know what to expect in the coming weeks or months. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Coming up, footage of Hamas terrorists being captured. Our guest today says the images send a strong message throughout the Arab world. And what is that message? Pressure on the leaders of Harvard and MIT keeps growing. The House now officially calling on them to resign. Arian Pastar brings you an update on the anti-Semitism allegations. And suppression by the Chinese regime in the U.S. Lawmakers hone in on college campuses in light of recent outcries of anti-Semitism. Jeremy Sandberg brings us that report after the break. Footage of Hamas terrorists being captured in Gaza and stripped to their underwear are going viral. While some criticize Israel for releasing the images, Alex Trayman from the Jewish News Syndicate says they send a strong message. He joins us now to discuss his take on the situation. Alex Trayman, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
To begin, there's been outrage over the images of Hamas captured inside Gaza, stripped down to their underwear. Now, human rights groups are calling this inhumane. Military experts, meanwhile, are saying that's to make sure there's no hidden explosives. Now, you actually have a different take. Tell us about that.
Well, it is true that they have to search them, but the pictures of having them stripped down in their underwear and blindfolded, I think are actually very important because they send a signal of strength on behalf of Israel, and also they are a tremendous humiliation to Hamas, and those images resonate throughout the Gaza Strip and the entire Arab world. And of course, before this, Israel was actually killing the operatives. But you have to understand that in the Hamas culture, there's a culture of martyrdom, and they glorify death, and that's a great honor for them. Seeing them stripped down in the underwear is a tremendous humiliation.
Now, expanding on that point, the U.S. is calling on Israel not to release these images. You argue that these images will help hasten the end of the war. How is that going to work?
If Hamas feels that it's being humiliated and the IDF is coming through and getting the surrender of Hamas operatives, it actually leads to the faster surrender of the rest of the Hamas operatives. If Israel continues to be involved in intensive gunfighting, that's going to make more deaths on the Israeli side and more deaths on the Palestinian side. So you actually want to get to a situation where Hamas understands that the war is over and actually surrenders, and they stop fighting to the last man standing.
Now, you are in Jerusalem. How do you read the different responses to, say, these captured Hamas versus what Hamas did to civilians on October 7th?
Well, exactly. If you look at what Hamas did on October 7th, I mean, the most barbaric pictures and videos that anybody's really ever seen. And then when you look at what they've been doing to the hostages that were taken, how are they treating them? You know, they're barely getting any food. Many of them have been sexually assaulted. It's believed that those that are still in custody are probably have been treated worse than the ones that Hamas actually released, and that's the reason why they don't want those other ones released, because the stories about what they're doing to the hostages, are so barbaric. So on the one hand, the international community recognizes that what Hamas did was completely barbaric and humiliating, but then they don't want to have the punitive measure instituted by Israel on the other end.
Hamas members have been arrested in Germany, the Netherlands, and Denmark over suspected terror plots. Now, how has the war expanded beyond just the Gaza Strip?
Exactly. This war is being fought by Iran and all of its terror proxies across the Middle East and into Europe and potentially beyond. And we've seen not only has Israel been attacked by Hamas, they've been attacked by Hezbollah more than 1,000 times with mortars and anti-tank guided missiles. The Houthis from Yemen have fired dozens of cruise and ballistic missiles, not only at Israel, but also at ships. Even just today, they fired at a ship in the Red Sea. They fired at USS naval vessels. And they've hijacked multiple ships in the Red Sea as well. So Israel's being attacked by all sides, and there's also been multiple plots, not just in Europe. You mentioned the Netherlands and Germany and Denmark. There was also a plot that was thwarted in Cyprus just last week. So we're seeing that Hamas, Hezbollah, and all of Iran's terror proxies are trying to strike wherever they can against Israeli positions.
And given this expansion, what is the message the U.S. must be sending now?
Well, the head of all the instability in the region is Iran. Iran is the head of a terror octopus that has tentacles that are destabilizing the entire Middle East. And it's not just attacking Israel. The Houthis in Yemen were fighting against the Saudis. Hezbollah has destroyed Lebanon. Hamas has destroyed the Gaza Strip. You have Katiba Hezbollah, which is inside Syria, and you have Iranian Revolutionary Guards that have destroyed Iraq. So Iran is putting its tentacles all over the Middle East and creating tremendous instability. Israel, on the other hand, has signed normalization agreements with multiple countries in the Middle East and continues to push towards peace. It has peace with Egypt, with Jordan, with the Emirates, with Bahrain, is working towards peace with Saudi Arabia. So the way to change the Middle East is to normalize between Israel and moderate Muslims and to stamp out terror. And all that terror is led by the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, which is Iran.
Alex Draymond, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
The House now officially condemning anti-Semitism on college campuses. Lawmakers passing a bill calling on the presidents of Harvard and MIT to resign. NTD's Arian Postar has an update on the rise of anti-Semitism at America's schools.
The House on Wednesday night passing a bipartisan measure. The resolution condemns congressional testimony by former University of Pennsylvania President Liz McGill, MIT leader Sally Kornbluth, and Harvard President Claudine Gay. All three of them avoided directly saying that calling for the genocide of Jews violates their school's code of conduct.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
UPenn's Liz McGill already resigned due to the backlash. Wednesday's resolution now calls for the resignation of Kornbluth and Gay. Now, Wednesday's resolution comes as yet another university in Pennsylvania is facing controversy. A Jewish student is reportedly suing Carnegie Mellon University. She says she suffered anti-Jewish discrimination during her time at the institution. Now, state lawmakers in Pennsylvania are taking action. Watch.
Anti-Semitism is wrong. The calling of genocide of the Jews, and any group for that matter, is wrong.
Pennsylvania State Representative Aaron Quaffer this week joined a group of Republican state representatives. They've introduced legislation aimed at stopping anti-Semitism at schools. It would require schools that receive state funding to acknowledge anti-Semitism as harassment, require schools to post curriculum guidelines regarding the Holocaust, and declare November 9th as Anti-Semitism Awareness and Education Day in Pennsylvania. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
As Americans debate over free speech and rising anti-Semitism on college campuses, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party is drawing attention to the regime's threat to academic freedom at U.S. institutions. NTD spoke with committee chairman Mike Gallagher about what's being done in response.
I would like to first introduce Ms. Anna Kwok.
Wednesday's hearing, titled CCP Transnational Repression, the party's effort to silence and coerce critics overseas, invited testimony from 3 witnesses.
Ms. Kwok, one of our witnesses, actually has a bounty on her head because she chose to stand up for freedom. Look at the wanted poster behind me.
Representative Dusty Johnson says the courage of witnesses is giving a sense of how terrible the Chinese regime is.
As we gain a deeper understanding of how comprehensive the evil of the Xi Jinping regime is, it's amazing to me that there are still American CEOs, there are still American political leaders, there are still American thought leaders who think that they need to play nice with the Chinese Communist Party and the PRC. Of course, the Chinese people are not our enemies. They are the primary victims of Xi's reign of terror. But we should not go out of our way to pander or coddle a dictator. And
the congressman says the U.S. needs to send a clear message, either through sanctions or other legal means.
That you cannot be a kingpin of this kind of organized crime and get away with it.
Johnson says the committee hearings give lawmakers opportunities to discuss how to hold the CCP accountable for its crimes. Witness Jinrei Zhang says he's received multiple threats on college campuses and online. He says his family has been interrogated over his dissenting views on the CCP.
And the threats were mostly the same, and the objective of trying to get me to stop talking was the same. The difference is that they showed my father a printout of my private chat records with my mother and my sister.
Zhang says the benefit of telling his story outweighs any possible harm.
I am in America, so I am less afraid. But I do believe that there will be some consequences to this. But I believe it is also very, very important for me to come forward to say this, because it is on the mind of so many people. Every person who has any kind of dissenting opinion against the Chinese Communist Party, they have thought about the possibility of being subject to transnational repression.
Chairman Mike Gallagher told NTD that holding CCP collaborators accountable is a matter of educating law enforcement and demanding action in some cases.
And I think that was really what happened with the illegal police station in New York. It's that initially the FBI didn't take action until there were reports drawing attention to it, and then they were forced to take action. So if we get law enforcement to a place where they're able to track things like this and take action before someone gets harassed or assaulted, that would be an ideal outcome.
A tactic committee member Congresswoman Michelle Steele agreed was critical.
So we really have to educate our law enforcement to protect us and protect all the immigrants.
Gallagher says university leaders and administrators need to be held accountable for protecting their students from the CCP's repression.
They seem to be obsessed with this idea of safe spaces, but when it comes to the actual physical safety of Chinese students or Taiwanese students, too often they turn a blind eye, perhaps because there's a lot of money coming from China to American universities.
The chairman suggests that institutions be stripped of federal funding or tax-exempt status if they break laws around disclosing foreign gifts. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Coming up, what are our vulnerabilities in the event of a war with China? Our guest today breaks down the possible impacts to the U.S. supply chain. And death rates are surging for older Americans overdosing on drugs, driven largely by fentanyl from China. Find out what lawmakers had to say today when we come back. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. Police in Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands arrested 7 individuals over an alleged terror plot against local Jewish communities. Many of those arrested allegedly have links to Hamas. The Israeli military released footage of around 70 Hamas terrorists captured at a hospital in Gaza. And U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with officials in Israel to discuss the war. The European Union decided to open membership talks with Ukraine. The process could take many years, and Hungary is the only member state against the move. Former Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani will not testify at his defamation trial. The lawsuit stemmed from his claim that 2 election workers in Georgia engaged in election fraud in 2020. The House passed this year's annual National Defense Authorization Act. It's at $886 billion, $28 billion more than last year. As we touched on earlier in the show, the U.S. is preparing for a hypothetical war with China by 2030. This year's National Defense Authorization Act lays out ways to begin strengthening U.S. defenses in the event of a war. Joining us now to discuss, we have retired General Robert Spalding, national security analyst and Epoch Times contributor. General Spalding, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks. Great to be back.
The U.S. has released its annual defense spending bill, and a lot of it mentions China, including preparing for the possibility of war in 2030. How is the U.S. preparing for that?
Well, I would say that they're not really. When you think about it, it's a huge bill. There's all kinds of stuff in it. Of course, it's an authorization. It also has to have appropriations associated with. So authorization is kind of the programs, and appropriations what gets paid for. I think when you look at the overall bill, though, what comes out very clear based on some of the animosity coming out from the Hill is that there's a fight right now directly between supporting Ukraine and supporting, border security. And so I think that's where everything else kind of has been sacrificed for that, and I think that's one of the challenges with any kind of legislation in Congress. There's so much there, and, you're just going to have to pick and choose your battles. And I think the hill that they've chosen to die on is the border.
And now, speaking of war prep, the House Select Committee on the CCP just released a 53-page report with 150 recommendations, including that the Federal Reserve should be required to stress test a U.S. bank's ability to, quote, withstand a potential sudden loss of market access to China. What are the current risks involving our financial institutions?
Well, I think they're less financial and more just where we get the building blocks for most of the things that get built today. The Raytheon CEO said, hey, we can't build the weapons that the U.S. government needs without China being part of that supply chain. Kind of terrifying. But so the problem is not necessarily, I think, a financial one. It's more or less, they build all the precursors for chemicals, for pharmaceuticals. A lot of the PCBs or circuit boards for microelectronics, the microelectronics themselves. There's just so many things that's manufactured in China that we depend on. And if it's not manufactured in China from a finished good perspective, some of the basic building blocks, precursors, if you will, for chemicals or, the materials for construction, so much of that has gone to China because we basically outsourced our entire productive capacity to China. That's where I think the problem is. The financial stuff, if it was just a financial issue and, we didn't have to worry about, hey, what are we going to do about reconstituting our ability to make antibiotics here in the United States, for instance, it would be much less a problem, right? Because we would deal with the financial impacts, but we would have the actual medicine. not having the medicine is far more concerning to me than not having, a potential financial risk in terms of the decoupling. In terms of the overall impact to the economy, it's far less than 10%, impact to the economy. So I don't think it's a financial risk at all or economic risk. It's the actual goods themselves that that's going to cause us to suffer because we just won't have access to certain things.
Given all the concerns you just laid out, what steps is the U.S. taking to shore up those areas, or are we even taking those steps?
Well, I think some of the steps are being taken independently of the government by companies themselves who are getting more and more nervous about having their supply chain located in China, given all the things that the Chinese Communist Party themselves have done, Xi Jinping has done. So it's not really what we're doing. That being said, there's a lot of money in the system, both in terms of infrastructure and manufacturing, but that hasn't been translated yet into a massive effort to reindustrialize America. The other challenge we face is we've basically cut down our energy production. So we need to basically reindustrialize America, bring back energy production, become energy independent in anticipation of this cutoff happening. And that's what we're not doing. If we don't do that, that's where we're really going to find ourselves in difficulty.
General Spalding, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
More and more older Americans are dying of drug overdoses. They often don't seek help because of the strong social stigma, leading some to call it the invisible epidemic. NTD's Virginia Gibson has more.
Death rates are surging for older Americans overdosing on drugs, the number quadrupling between 2002 and 2021. At a congressional hearing Thursday, experts explained why.
1 in 8 of those deaths was intentional in the judgment of the coroner. So these are suicides usually involving prescription medication. But that isn't the fundamental driver of what's making these numbers explode. Those are unintentional deaths in illicit markets. So these are people who are consuming drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, and particularly fentanyl.
Professor Keith Humphreys says fentanyl is a key reason behind the surge in deaths. Older Americans who are using these drugs often don't seek help. A big reason.
Stigma, negative perceptions about people with substance use disorders is something that we're essentially swimming in as a society. Stigma is such a huge issue that it keeps our issues invisible.
Addiction expert William Stouffer says when someone dies from a drug overdose, family members seldom report it. So this fact remains invisible, leading some to call it the invisible epidemic. Stouffer says adults suffering with drug addiction need very complex care because substance abuse itself has become more and more complex, especially with the addition of fentanyl.
Nearly all fentanyl-related deaths in the United States start in China.
Countering China's chemical production of them.
Crack down on the chemical suppliers in China.
Stop packages containing illicit drugs from being shipped to the U.S. from places like Communist China.
A key theme at the hearing was that China is the main reason behind all this fentanyl. It sends fentanyl as well as materials used to make it into Mexico. Drug cartels then smuggle the fentanyl into the United States. Lawmakers say stopping China is key to helping older Americans. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Coming up, Paris hopes Olympic swimmers will be able to use an iconic waterway for the 2024 Olympics. And that means digging a giant basin. Find out more on preparing for the Games. And in sports memorabilia news, a set of year-old Lionel Messi jerseys nearly breaks Michael Jordan's auction record. NTD's Dave Martin joins us to discuss why when we come back. Welcome back. Paris is digging a giant basin. It's supposed to help manage pollution levels in the iconic River Seine. The city hopes Olympic swimmers will be able to use the waterway in 2024. NTD's Andrew Thomas has more on the preparations for the Games.
Paris hopes to host sporting events in the famous River Seine. The city is building the massive underground basin to the south.
It's like a marathon. We've been talking about this for several years, but now we're approaching the last leg. And what was a challenge before is now a commitment, which is, first of all, to have events in the Seine during the Olympic Games. But beyond all that, to have a heritage of swimming for Parisians.
The Basin will have a capacity about the equivalent of 20 Olympic pools, but it's not for swimming in.
For a long time, during the industrial era, the Seine was an overflow. We didn't hesitate to discharge wastewater into it. We put an end to this principle. Wastewater is now treated by the sanitation network and goes to treatment plants. And so, yes, in fact, we are in the process of regenerating a sensitive natural space.
The Basin isn't the only subterranean news. Paris metro ticket prices will almost double during the 2024 Olympics. Residents with regular passes will be exempt.
It's the actual cost, but there's no way everyday commuters from the Paris region have to pay for that. It's normal that the Olympic Games visitors have to pay more to reinforce public transport services during the Games. It's the price to pay for the success of these Games.
The mayor of Paris warned last week that public transport services would be insufficient during the events. The local leader disagrees.
We will have more transport offerings so that all of the games can be accessed by public transport, and this has a cost. I committed to the residents of the Paris region that they won't be the ones paying for the cost.
The Olympics will be held during July and August. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And in more sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, 6 Lionel Messi jerseys were auctioned off today for nearly $8 million, just short of the record. What makes them so valuable?
Well, these are from his World Cup run last year when he led Argentina to the title. Now, these fell just short of the record for a game-worn jersey, which was just over $10 million for Michael Jordan's a year ago. I'm actually surprised they came that close, though. I mean, these are only a year old. That Jordan jersey is from the '98 finals. It's a much tougher find. Now, it should be noted that these jerseys were from the first half of 6 of their games, including the semis and the finals. Apparently changed at halftime. Now, I would guess that the ones he wore in the second half ever came to auction, especially for the finals when they actually won the World Cup. It would probably beat the record.
Wow, and now shifting gears to basketball, the NBA suspended Warriors forward Draymond Green indefinitely following his injection Tuesday night. Is this an unusual move?
Yeah, those indefinite suspensions are usually reserved for like off-the-court incidents, like with Kyrie Irving last year. Green, though, has already been ejected 3 times this year, and he's served a 5-game suspension, and we're only a quarter of the way through the season. Now, that was his 6th career suspension. He's also had some incidents involving some teammates. Now, this all stems from Tuesday night when he hit Phoenix's Yusuf Nurkic in the head pretty hard and was ejected from the game. Now, his back was turned to him when he swung his arms. He said it was an accident. He was trying to sell the foul. I actually thought it was an accident, even if it was kind of reckless. Now, with this suspension, though, it sounds like some kind of counseling will be involved. So I'm guessing it'll be longer than his previous 5-game penalty.
Now, this does put his Golden State Warriors into a tougher situation. They won a title just 18 months ago, but are just 10-13 now. Why do you think they're struggling?
You know, I would blame it on age, but probably their 2 best performing players right now are their 2 oldest. I mean, Steph Curry was 35. He leads the league in 3-point shooting as well as free throw shooting. Chris Paul, meanwhile, is 38. He's 6th in the league in assists, but he's a bench player. I mean, he comes off the bench, only averages 26 minutes a game. Now, head coach Steve Kerr has started to bench a couple of their core players, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, who really haven't been at their best this year. Green, of course, has missed time with suspensions. I don't see them making a big trade, though, partly because they have older, more expensive players that really aren't coveted by their teams, and they've got several of them. So I think they have to work with what they have. Now, Kerr is probably the best head coach in the game, but if he gets this team turned around, this will be his best head coaching performance ever, probably.
Moving now to baseball, more details on Shohei Ohtani's contract have been revealed, including a right to opt out if there is a change in the team's personnel. Is this a common clause in baseball?
No, not really. I mean, I remember a former Tampa Bay manager, Joe Madden, had it. And it was actually for the same person, Andrew Friedman, who left Tampa Bay's front office, and he's now in LA's front office. I mean, that's how well respected he is. You know, the Dodgers have won their division in 8 of Friedman's 9 seasons. And although they operate with one of the league's highest payrolls, he really specializes in finding hidden gems in the draft. I mean, you pick last in the draft when you constantly have one of the best records in the game. So it's even harder that way. But they keep doing it, and it really allows them to keep plugging holes with good young players. They also use them as trade bait to get veterans. Now, meanwhile, Ohtani's new Dodgers jersey has already set a record for most jerseys sold within the first 48 hours. So he's already making his presence felt.
Lots of news there as always. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.